and Pipi Anya didn't come, and okay. So this is what I'm going to do. Just want this for the memories. No, this is very ironic, and I'll tell you why. It's me. I'll tell you why. So whoever did show up, this is just a huge extra credit opportunity. Those are gone. Let me just get you on here. Zhenya, just take a class with me in the future. 1 second. Yeah. Okay, I got you. So what are we talking about today? I want to show you. Okay, so instead of the movie, let me tell you a story, first of all, about showing the movie, because this, I thought the third time I'll break the bad luck with this film. But here we are in 2023, okay? 84 registered. Now, I want to tell you why this is ironic, and it's not an accident that I'm showing you the following. Is when I presented this film back in 2022, the same thing happened. This was in the US. And exactly the same thing happened. About 80 people registered and 5 showed up. This is what I find tragic. It's not only the events are tragic, but I'm wondering if there's something tragic about this film itself, or anytime I try to spread awareness, because let me tell you, basically, this was a meme that was produced back in 2014. It didn't age well, okay? It didn't age well, nor did this cartoon age well. This was back in 2014 as well. So what I'm just trying to show you is leading up to a couple of memes. So to give you a history surrounding the film, this was the image of the Soviet Union, right? At a time that kind of suggests happiness, abundance, golden fields, right? In fact, the Soviet Union endured one of the greatest examples of engineered famine. The thing is, I want you to look, we're going to watch this, okay? And the thing is, when was it produced? When did it take? So at 2 million views, that's not bad in terms of one of the greatest episodes in history that of mass death that really got no attention. The sad thing is, when did it take people to wake up to this event? Only in 2022. Only after the invasion of Ukraine, people started to pay attention to the events I'm going to be showing you in this video. So let me just make sure it's working. Screen share, that is, because yes, it is. Okay, so let us watch this.
Пухлих у полі по житах, а скільки лежало по дорозі мертвих.
Голодомор я добре пережила і пам'ятатиму, скільки житиму.
This is Rostislav, reading the words of his grandmother Lydia, who lived in Ukraine.
Це страшно дивитися і згадувати.
Lydia was a witness and survivor of a horrific man-made famine that killed millions in Ukraine.
My father has recorded an oral history.
So famine can happen for a couple of reasons. It can happen, let's take the Irish famine, right? It was a bacterial agent infected the potato crop, right? Yes?
Wasn't it a fungus?
Blight, yeah, potato blight. It's something in between a fungus and a different matter. And now there was a locust can cause famine. This was entirely man-made.
History that his grandmother told him, and he just recorded it in ink pen.
А в нас сім'я, 10 осіб. Батько увечері каже: подохнемо з голоду, щось треба робити.
The famine hit several parts of the Soviet Union from 1932 to 1933, but in Ukraine, it became known as the Holodomor, a term meaning death by starvation. It was genocide, carried out by a dictator who wanted to keep Ukraine under his control and would do everything in his power to cover it up for decades. In 1917, after the fall of the Russian Empire, Ukraine briefly gained freedom. But by 1922, it was forcefully integrated into the newly formed Soviet Union and became known as the Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic. At the time, the country was largely rural. Most of the population were villagers and farmers.
Self-reliance is a very important thing for every Ukrainian. And so having that piece of land, cultivating that land was something that was very important to so many.
In fact, Ukraine was known for its farmland. With some of the world's most fertile soil, the country was a huge grain producer, especially in these regions. Over time, it became known as the breadbasket of the Soviet Union, and Joseph Stalin wanted complete control of it. When Stalin rose to power in the mid-1920s, a distinctly Ukrainian culture and national identity were thriving. But by the late 1920s, he and other Soviet leaders feared it could bring on a Ukrainian revolution. They decided to crack down on what they saw as an ideological threat to the Soviet regime. And they began a widespread, violent purge of Ukrainian intellectuals along with priests and religious structures.
You have to think about it as kind of decapitating the leadership of the country. You cut off its head, basically.
Around the same time, Stalin introduced a 5-year plan that would eventually give him control of Ukrainian agriculture. The goal was to industrialize all of the Soviet Union at a rapid pace, which meant building up industries like electricity, coal, and steel. To fund this project, Stalin turned to the collectivization of agriculture, which meant consolidating individual farms across all of the Soviet Union into large, state-run farms.
If you combine, 60, 70, 80 small farms into one big farm, it's easier to control it. It's easier to extract surplus grain or surplus sugar or whatever that farm produces.
In Ukraine, the plan gave Stalin direct control over grain production, which meant he could extract all of the crop to sell to the West as a way to fund Soviet industrialization.
By this policy of industrialization, by taking away everything that grew on the land, Stalin aimed to really destroy that connection between the land and life itself. That was one of the key ideological things in industrialization, saying that it's not about the land, it's about the state, the Soviet state, that will then provide for your livelihood.
Many Ukrainian farmers who had worked independently for their entire lives resisted Stalin's plan. So Stalin found another way to attack them. He launched a propaganda campaign to smear farmers. He labeled anyone resistant to collectivization a kulak, a Russian term for a wealthy peasant, and depicted them as greedy exploiters and enemies of the state, and sometimes as literal parasites.
This was a way to drive a wedge within a community, and it's a way to justify, I think, what the Soviet state and what the Communist Party is trying to do on the ideological side.
No matter how rich or poor, Stalin seized the belongings of the so-called kulaks. He then exiled, imprisoned, or executed hundreds of thousands of them. And for the farmers who remained, he engineered a famine to starve them.
Elevate your gaming, elevate your sales. Everything sounds the same. You need Ortune Business to make sure your brand stands out. Would you ask an influencer how to invest your money? No.
In 1931, Stalin deliberately set quotas for grain production that were far beyond the capacity of farmers across the Soviet Union. When farmers failed to meet those quotas, Stalin's men swept their farms to confiscate all the grain they could find. Records show the Soviets took over 4 million tons of grain from Ukraine alone in 1932. That same year, a new law punished anyone who took even a handful of grain or was caught hiding grain or bread with 10 years in prison or the death penalty. Stalin's oppressive collection policy created a famine that started spreading in grain-producing regions across the Soviet Union. Some party members sent Stalin letters about the growing crisis, pleading for a change in policy.
And that's what makes it so diabolical, because if a government is really concerned about its population, its people, then at the end of the first famine year, it can reverse its policies. But instead, the government and the party actually double down.
Their commitment to collectivization made the famine deadly in many parts of the Soviet Union. But when it came to Ukraine, Stalin's need for the complete submission of its people compounded the effects of the famine. In the fall and winter of 1932, Soviet police began seizing not just grain, but anything edible, even livestock. Farms in Ukraine, and sometimes entire villages, were blacklisted for missing grain quotas, torn apart for food, and prohibited from receiving any supplies. And in January 1933, knowing Ukrainians were leaving in search of food, Stalin closed the borders of Ukraine and policed migration from Ukrainian villages to cities too. In the coming months, tens of thousands of Ukrainian villagers were caught trying to flee and were sent back to their homes to starve.
This was a targeted extermination of peasantry.
People tried to find food in, wherever they could, in rivers and streams. They began to eat their animals, their pets. They began to catch birds and mice, whatever they could find on trees that would give them some sort of sustenance. People were so desperate that they ate flesh from animals that they found on the road, and some even resorted to cannibalism.
But even in this unimaginable suffering, Ukrainians fought for their lives and each other.
She was my great-grandmother. I have fond memories of her. My dad, when he took me to her village, I was really young. So Lydia's house is actually my first memories. The way Holodomor happened, it was mostly happening in the rural areas. Lydia was a student at the time.
And she actually told me about how they survived.
Ноччю під деревом викопали ямку, у ямку поставили діжечку або ящик, насипали зерна, засипали землею і висипали попіл.
At night, they would make flour out of that wheat and make some makeshift bread. And the reason why they would do it at night is that nobody could see the smoke coming out of their windows.
Lydia describes horrific village scenes, seeing a mother die of starvation and police taking away children. Once, when Lydia saw her neighbors who had bloated bodies and couldn't get up, she started to sneak them bread and milk. It's likely due to her efforts that 7 people out of that family of 9 survived. After its peak in May and June of 1933, the famine slowly started subsiding. Likely because of a weakened labor force, the Soviet regime finally took measures to decrease grain confiscations and arrests. By 1934, most regions collectivized. Almost all farmers were working for the state. Though we will never know the total number of deaths from the Holodomor, a recent study estimated nearly 4 million Ukrainians killed. Places like the North Caucasus, with a large Ukrainian population, suffered greatly too. And further east, Kazakhstan lost at least a third of its population. So many people perished during the Holodomor that the Soviet Union had to send people over to Ukraine to rebuild the labor force.
The main goal was to resettle those areas in order to work the land. There were settlers brought in from various parts of the Soviet Union, but mainly from Russia.
This resettlement program set off a wave of future campaigns over the years. Many Russians moved here in the east and south, which are to this day places with large Russian populations.
Now, that's crucial to understand one of the causes of the fighting today. In other words, when Russia said we're going into Ukraine to protect the Russian populations, keep in mind these were populations that were resettled as a result of a famine. So you're basically taking one tragedy and then pouring, if you will, more or less humanitarian crimes on top of that.
In Russia, Stalin carried out a massive disinformation campaign to cover up the famine he'd created. Throughout the crisis, he outright denied that a famine ever took place. He banned the Soviet press from reporting on the famine and banned foreign correspondents from even going to Ukraine. But he strategically allowed language that would effectively downplay the Holodomor. Words like food shortages or food supply problems. For example, Walter Duranty, a Moscow correspondent for the New York Times, who won a Pulitzer for his reporting on Stalin's success with the 5-year plan.
And so he is the main antagonist in Mr. Jones, the villain of the film, if you will.
Denied the famine in his reporting, calling it a food shortage. Duranty was challenged by others, including journalist Gareth Jones, who snuck into Ukraine and wrote a series of articles on how famine ruled Russia. At the time, Russia was a term many journalists used to describe the Soviet Union as a whole, including Ukraine. Jones wrote, "Everywhere was the cry, 'There is no bread. We are dying.'" In response, Duranty, who had more influence than Jones, put out another article, this time insisting that Russians were hungry, but not starving. Several photographers who also tried to expose the humanitarian crisis were arrested for their photos. Some managed to get their images to leaders in the West, but the images didn't mobilize support for Ukraine. The West didn't want to get involved in Soviet politics.
The most cautionary tale is remembering that the world didn't come to Ukraine's rescue. It seemed like an internal issue. There was a lot of misinformation, disinformation.
Outside of controlling the media narrative, Stalin destroyed archives and made sure death certificates didn't use the word starvation as a cause of death. And then there was the case of the 1937 census, whose findings showed a drop in the population of Ukraine.
So Stalin decided that he couldn't allow this to be made public. The people who compiled the census, most of them were arrested and some were even executed, and the census never became public.
Over the course of the next several decades, the Soviet Union continued to suppress the Holodomor. But in Ukraine, the truth was quietly passed down through generations. In more recent years, the Holodomor has been recognized by more than a dozen countries as a genocide. In fact, Raphael Lemkin, the researcher who coined the term genocide, applied it to Ukraine on the basis of 4 reasons: the extermination of intellectuals, the destruction of churches and priests, the starvation of farmers, and the fragmentation of Ukrainian people through resettlement. But the government...
That's the key to the birth of the word genocide. It was coined by Lemkin, who came from this area, who came from the region, to describe what ravaged his ancestral land.
The government of Russia has yet to acknowledge any historical responsibility for the famine. They've maintained, falsely, that the famine hit Russia just as hard. And today, similar tactics of disinformation are being used to perpetrate another violent attack against Ukrainians.
If one looks at the coverage provided by Russian state media, it seems like the Ukrainians keep shelling themselves. It seems like it's somehow the Ukrainians' fault that there is this war in their own land.
It's war against our people. I can't imagine. The second time we step in the same river.
The whole cities right now in Ukraine are being obliterated. It is really my fear that if Russia were to be successful in this current invasion of Ukraine, they will make sure that this page of history is rewritten and is forgotten.
That's how long it took. To be honest, the first YouTube video describing this event, it took the war, I should say this phase of the violence in Ukraine. It was February 2022 for attention finally to be brought to this. That's how long it took. Now, not sure where the, oh God. I'm really, this is just really tragic. You guys know my fight with the IT infrastructure here. Anyway, so when I show you this, you can realize the following. How many people, if this is a place where the term genocide was developed, how many countries recognized that genocide had occurred? This is about it. This is about it. And when you keep in mind, Canada has a very large Ukrainian population. Ukraine, Georgia, Poland, the Baltic states, not even the US, and Australia.
I think the UK recently recognized.
This is pre-invasion, I think. So prior to 2022. So in other words, the whole point of it was that this is a crime against humanity that happened for the longest time. It takes another crime to raise attention. So I should say this map was released prior to February 24th, 2022. Yeah.
It said that Kazakhstan had a big issue over like a third of the population,
Yeah.
but then how come Kazakhstan not recognized?
Because you see, okay, that's a very good question. Because Kazakhs want, and for them to recognize this, they want their suffering also to be recognized. Okay. Also, you have to realize this has to deal with Kazakhstan's relationship with Russia. At the same time, you don't want to antagonize Russia. So it's a complicated manner. But for the longest time, when I've been teaching about this famine in Prague to Ukrainians and Kazakhs, usually there's a lot of pushback from the Kazakhs saying, Professor, why didn't you recognize our suffering? So what you have is this kind of competitive, it's tragic, but this kind of competition to have suffering recognized. Speaking of which, speaking of that kind of setting, just to show you kind of in an innocent time. So this is the setting I was talking about in Prague. These two students are Ukrainian. These two are Afghan. They're Kazakh. Okay. And just to show you a tale of two students, I want you to look at the following story. This person here, look who he's standing next to. This is at a karaoke bar in Prague. It's the year 2019, it's pre-COVID. I want to show you what happens to him in the summer of 2021, what happens to her in 2022. The following video. This is when the Taliban, took over. That's in front of his living room. so much the Taliban can do. Keep in mind, mostly light arms, but still horrific. Now compare that to the Ukrainian students' experience. This is witness from their home. I mean, it's amazing in my lifetime to just, who would I ever know that moment of innocence and how their lives would be completely changed within the span of a year. So just to kind of, when we talk about humanitarian displacement, I was in Lebanon watching the news when this came out. This news report. And of course, her husband couldn't be with her. Her husband had to stay and fight. This woman had just made it to the front line. And there was something that very profoundly affected me of her story of being at the Poland-Ukraine border. After her interview, she proclaimed Slava Ukraini. And then every time after that interview was shown, they edited it out. But why was this such a profound image for me was, of course, I was visiting my family in Lebanon. I'm Muslim, they're Orthodox. And I had seen this image before. And I think that's why it was so profound to see that archetypal image. And then when I came around, this is just a coincidence, but do you see how similar this woman looks and her child to this image of Mary and Jesus? It's an accident, a complete accident. I was just trying to find something to say why this maybe appealed to me on some kind of archetypal level when I was able to find this image. I want to show you the following now. And before I do this, just to tell you about something of an accident. So, you know, I mean, here we are. You know, this is the kind of the tragedy is like, yes, yeah.
Why did they edit the phrase out of the thing? I thought
Because they probably, I should say it means glory to Ukraine. And they might have just considered it maybe too inflammatory.
But it became very popular because of
it. Became very, well, it's just how Ukrainians greet each other. Right? Yeah, exactly. So the BBC and the kind of so-called quota trying to be neutral, just kind of, again, already the erasure part of Ukraine's culture. Yeah, so anyway, this is the story of the Holodomor. And or the story around trying to tell the story as a historian, because this is a struggle to get the story told. And I think the struggle on the parallel level kind of reflects, so like I said, I organized this with the House of Ukraine. So basically the Association of Ukrainians in San Diego. I organized this event. And like I said, the hard thing was this. Only 5 people showed up. None of the local Ukrainians showed up. Neither did any of the students I told to please show up for this. And here I am again now, a year later, and the same thing is happening. And, you know, so sometimes I could tell you what's going on is, I mean, I hate to say it, and I wrote an article about it. Ukraine fatigue. People are just getting fatigued from this conflict. Now, I'm not Ukrainian. I have no connection to this land. The only connection I have is I went to that country in 2016 knowing very little, but it transformed my life, meeting all those students and knowing all the men in that photo have been mobilized for war, and every single woman in that photo has been displaced in the country. That's it. My connection with this country only began in 2016, but there was no going back for me after that first trip. The story of trying to show this film or how much money I've raised is saying a lot. This is Ukraine for me. This is what I'm saying. People are getting tired of it. But this is also the other tragedy. The other tragedy is the following. Is a lot of my Ukrainian partners on the ground are also getting tired of it. And this is what's being hard now, is sometimes fighting the fight by myself. And this is what's been killing me. I mean, I knew my life wouldn't be the same after February 24th. But then sometimes things like this happen. And I'll show you this. Sometimes when I'm ready just to give up and say, this isn't my fight. Why am I letting this place kill me? It's not my fight. It's not my country. Why, in some cases, do I seem to be fighting harder than the Ukrainians? And this came. And then I just get an email. Somebody I've never met. Just see what happened. I called her on WhatsApp and Zoom and I trained her. I trained her how to get a PhD. Basically, what did she want to do? She wanted to use new digital forensics to use as evidence of war crimes in Ukraine. I mean, really cutting edge stuff, things that are absolutely necessary. And so it's around June 29th when I'm feeling very despondent. She tells me this news. I got a PhD petition and today discussed the terms of employment. And I'm grateful for your advice and assistance that helped me a lot. Especially the one on asking one of the committee members to be my second supervisor. She's going to be Indeed. So thank you again. And that's it. Sometimes you just, you get many victories and then you get setbacks like today. And so the only thing I could say to you guys about this is, I don't think this particular day, not only was that message not an accident, I want you to look at this video. I was walking in a Rome square. And when I was walking in the Rome square, somebody was playing the operetta, the aria Vincero, I Will Win. And look where I was standing last summer when I heard those words. Flag was there. Flag is flying over there.
It's in the square. Go back there. Go back there. You get nobody. That's the very right. Let me come on right. There. Yeah. Yeah.
And again, I don't think that was an accident. It was just such a perfect moment to hear that song right standing next to those two flags. And so that's the lesson for you guys in the back. You guys will win. But we're going to have a lot of defeats along the way. Anyway,
Maybe we should go there, isn't it? No?
That's okay. So that's it. I couldn't get the film to work. And I don't want you to lose any. It's a technological problem. It's the IT problem. The VPN won't let me show it here. That was the other setback. So I was just like, I can't win with this film. And so remember, like I said, I've had such bad experience with that, showing that film. But at least I set it up. Try to watch the film on your own. I forced all 80 of my students to come watch this film. I did a last minute favor saying, I can't force you to watch it, but I really thought at least 70 would show up. This is why you guys will forever win the, whatever grades you're gonna get a special grade in my heart for showing up tonight. Because I really wanted 70 students to learn about the, one of the most tragic episodes in history as well. But yeah, and so like I said, the fact that they didn't show up is very symbolic of, trying to fight for this crime. The crime that happened as of 1929 and the crimes that are going on literally as we speak. Anyway, so it wasn't supposed to be like this, but anyway, do any of you have any questions or thoughts? This was supposed to be about sharing, and let me just put I'll tell you the third story of the tragic episode of this film. So one time in San Diego, nobody showed up. The second time when I showed it in Prague, what happened was, hey, how's it going? So what happened in Prague was the following. I screamed at when one student was telling her story of how her grandmother survived the Holodomor. When I screamed at another student, for looking at his cell phone. While this poor Ukrainian student was sharing the story of how her grandmother had endured this. And I got fired for that job for screaming at her. So that's the thing. Whenever I show this film, there's always something that has to happen. Anyway, it's kind of like, I don't know if any of you have heard the film The Ring. It's originally a Japanese film that got remade into a very bad film. The Ring it's about a film that's cursed. When it's shown, there's a curse surrounding it. But for the Ukrainians, like I said, this is I'm recording this. Just keep in mind, I'm gonna post it on YouTube because it is kind of very symbolic. Do you want to say, if it records, because I've had so much IT problems that I have my doubts, but for the Ukrainians who came here, do you want to share what this particular what this episode means for you, or what's going on now as well? This is your event.
What it means. Personally, I'm from West, and as you could see on the map, the West was under a different country. We were under Poland, so we didn't have the famine.
Where in the West?
Ternopil.
Okay.
Yeah, but from the mom's side, part of the family was in the center. So, and one thing that my great grandma always says, that the worst thing that it can be in the life, it's war and famine. This is the worst thing that can be in the humankind history, because my great grandma, she survived the Second World War II.
I was about to say she survived both at least the war part. Yeah,
yes. And it's really tragic because it's genocide, and officially you could see 4 million Ukrainians die. But if you check the changes in the population in the 20 years. There's like 20 million Ukrainians just disappeared, and now it's been manipulated as the part of East and South is Russians, but of course they're gonna be Russians if you kill Ukrainians and bring on their places Russians in the end, and just use it as a tool to begin a war. It's a big tragedy, and the biggest tragedy that the whole world, like mostly they don't know about that.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like I said, it took till 2022 for the world to realize this happened. Very good. Anya, we're just now sharing experiences as Ukrainians. What does the Holodomor mean to you? What does and it doesn't, I mean, to what's going on in the very present. I wasn't sure which one of you just posted the conditions on the front and how bad the snow is. But those conditions are miserable. I wasn't sure, was that you who just posted just, but yeah, I mean, the floor is yours. It's a Ukraine Club event. Any of you guys?
I mean, like my family, they never told any stories because this is like the topic that is too hard to talk about. But there was like a rule in my great grandparents' houses that the food can never be thrown away.
Exactly.
Like especially bread. Like there is also a saying, like I learned it at school, that like you're not allowed to throw the bread away, never, ever, ever. And I think that's just because of how like history evolved. Yeah, and also like my great grandparents would never throw away food, and I only have like one, like only my great grandmother is alive now. But she was like, I think she was 3 or 4 years old when the Holodomor happened. But also a few days ago, when there was like a day of how it's called, remembrance.
Okay, remembrance, yes.
Remembrance of Holodomor victims. I just found a website where they show like the list of people who died because of Holodomor, and I found more than 50 people with like surnames of my like relatives.
No way.
And like the locations, because I know where my grandparents were born and raised, for example, and I knew their like surnames, so I just like started searching, because I am from Kiev and my family is from either Kiev or Cherkasy region, but they're both like in central Ukraine. And I found like at least 50 people with my surnames in the exact same villages where my grandparents are from, but I never heard about them.
It's a bit different story because my family is also from the western Ukraine, if you know, behind the Carpathian Mountains. So the famine in the 30s didn't affect that much, but what happened is that my great grandfather on my mother's side had a big household, and it was taken away when the Bolsheviks arrived.
The collectivization.
Yeah, but it was even before the famine when the lands were taken. But yeah, it's sad that in those times the West didn't really influence that as much and didn't pay as much attention, and this basically the same story repeats itself in some way. Like the world is seen like everyone is helping Ukraine, but at the same time, maybe not as much to stop the war at this moment.
Yeah.
Because as we speak, the tragic things happen in Ukraine now.
Well, I mean, I remember when October 7th happened. I remember my first initial reaction. The first victim of this is going to be Ukraine. Already in the summer, I said Ukraine fatigue is setting in. I wrote the article I wrote about Ukraine fatigue, and I knew it was setting in because I couldn't get that article published in any international media. So I finally got it published in the Kyiv Post, which isn't bad, but the whole point was to kind of raise awareness of how the world is kind of now losing. It's just getting forgotten. And so for that, and then when October 7th happened, I said, forget it. Now that's it. Complete attention will not only be focused away, but then also remember now, like even within the US Senate, all military aid, you see now how it's kind of balanced or contingent with, aid to Israel. And I mean, there you go. That's what, so when I said that it's somehow Hamas could, be able to undermine kind of the attention on Ukraine, but that's absolutely yeah.
I forgot.
Okay, you can remember it. You can say it later. Anyone else want to speak?
Oh, great.
If you remember.
You said you were only unable to upload your or publish your document outside of the gift post. Did they tell you why, or you still?
Oh no, I can't get. I mean, usually I publish. Let's say if I could get an article published in Washington Post, for example, or Time Magazine, right? But no, now I mean, no. It's just an editorial. Editor will just say we're not interested. We'll pass, and that's usually it because anything that gets published has to be newsworthy. So basically, I was writing an article since May. Kyiv endured a relentless bombing of ballistic missiles, drones. It was like the Blitz. Kyiv was undergoing the Blitz. And so basically, here, I'll show it to you. The article I wrote was basically I write it as Kyiv and the Blitz, okay? Basically, the whole idea was that
so the whole thing was that everyone was just getting bored about hearing from the
board. And really, I was hoping to publish it in the Guardian or a British newspaper because I was trying to make British people sympathetic. What Kyiv was undergoing was what London had undergone. What the British cities were undergoing was what all of Britain had undergone during the Blitz. So I'm using kind of a British metaphor to get the British engaged. No British newspaper was interested. So yeah, eventually the Kyiv Post took it. But I mean, there you're speaking to the people who are, who don't need to know about this. They live through it literally. So, you're trying to bring awareness. Yeah, that's what I think.
On my mother's side, so that would be her grandmother, my mother's grandmother. She got orphaned at a very early age. She got orphaned during when the Bolshevik Revolution started happening, and then kind of the other part, like her other parts of the family, like her uncles and who were supposed to kind of take care of her, they kind of abandoned her, in that situation, and she, because her family, like her family was kind of wealthy, so she had a lot of jewelry saved, but it was obvious during collectivization a lot of it got taken away. But then during the Holodomor, she would because during the Holodomor they had centers where you could exchange jewelry or precious stuff in exchange for bread, but which often was not actually good quality or was also being faked, and they would put clay inside it. And so a lot of our kind of family artifacts, obviously they got all taken away because she was giving it away for food. And she never, to my mother, she never really told anything else. She only kind of told this because my mom was curious about why there is nothing to give forward to inherit how I feel in Western families you see it much more often when they have something passed down,
Inherited, yeah.
But not even in the terms of a house or whatever, just an earring that is passed down through I don't know, 3 generations or something, and we don't have that. And that I think is kind of part of what Holodomor also did. And then on my father's side, so my grandmother, she was
7. She's very old. And she also had a brother and a sister. And her father died during the Holodomor. And she has a collection of short stories that she wrote, privately. Not about the Holodomor itself, but she has a story that talks a little about it, and she never told the story to me. But when reading the short story, you can I see that she doesn't name it or doesn't say they starved us or no, but you understand what is going on. But they had my father's family, my father's side of the family, they were more, I guess, lucky because they were living. I mean, I'm from Odessa, so they didn't live in Odessa, but they lived near Liman. I don't know, it's like a river sort of.
Yeah.
So but it was obviously winter, froze over, and so her brother would go and try to fish and kind of survive from that. And she told me how her mother would just walk from there to Odessa and not come back for a week. And so they would just stay home and they wouldn't know if she was okay and if she was coming back or not. And yeah, kind of that. So that's fun. Yeah.
Now, for those of
Just
you,
it's I just think never mind.
no, say it. I'll show you the video of what happened earlier. So just this is the best time to always say it.
Personally, I think it's great this is happening here at this university, that I guess you're helping to spread word about this and talk about this. Because honestly, I guess in my personal experience growing up, I felt and then going to also visiting international schools and doing family projects.
Mm-hmm.
And I just these are a few stories the things that I said is kind of almost everything that I know about my family and the past of my family. So it's having nothing good to tell or something you're proud that someone from your kind of grandpa or whatever did that your family's very proud of, and this is the legacy. And just feeling oh, there is just a part missing from where am I coming from and what am I doing here and who my family actually is. And I think events like these are very valuable for not just this is specific to Ukrainians, I guess, but just in general, events like these that talk about, because we're not the only nation that this happened to, genocides and attempts to exterminate culture or language. So I think it's important that the other nations who are affected like this also contribute and talk and try to investigate, I guess, in discussions like this. So yes, thank you for coming here too.
Well, thank you for that. But it's funny how you walked in because you missed the whole. You kind of made. You gave a really good ending because I was really despondent because technically 80 people were supposed to have shown up, and of course for most of those 80 people, I was forcing them. I knew I was forcing them, but sometimes you have to force people to learn about this. But then when you take away that coercion, people really don't care. And this is what we're saying. Julia.
Yeah, I was just like, there's a blogger in Ukraine who's like talking about culture and like talking about some things that we had and now we don't have them anymore. And she was talking also about the inheritance thing that in Ukraine it's not very popular. Like, we have very beautiful traditional clothing. It's called vyshivanka. So
Vyshivanka,
it's
yeah.
basically like embroidered shirt or a dress or a skirt or anything. And a lot of people like in Western Ukraine, because I have like friends from all over Ukraine, and it's really different in different regions because Ukraine is so big. And like people in western part of Ukraine, they usually have like a lot of vyshivankas that they have from like their great grandmas, and they have been stored in the like special, I don't know how they're called. Like in Ukraine, it's called skrinya, but like it's basically a box. I don't know how they call it.
Closet. That's great. And it's yeah,
Like
it's
a
a closet.
box
It's a
with-
closet.
Yeah, it's a box for clothing, but it's like a very traditional thing. And most of my friends in Western Ukraine, they have like 10 vyshivankas from their like relatives. I don't have any of them. Because my family is from central Ukraine, and it was either they would have to exchange it for like clothing or something else during Soviet Union. Like it was the matter of saving the culture or just like surviving. And in most cases, they chose to survive, which is obvious. I would probably do the same thing if I would have like an option between choosing like clothing, a piece of clothing, or like bread. So yeah, my family doesn't have any like traditional clothing that has been there for like more than 100 years, or like any jewelry or anything. And also the same thing happens with traditions. I feel like because you like Western Ukraine was mostly like with Poland or other countries, they were not so harsh on Ukraine as Soviets were. So for example, in my family, we don't have that many traditions as my friends have in Western Ukraine. For example, Christmas. It's like one of my best friends, she's from Western Ukraine. It's like city 20 kilometers from Polish border. And I once went to celebrate Christmas with her. And it was such a different experience for me because for us, like for my family, it was just like having a dinner. There is like a traditional thing that we are supposed to have 12 dishes on the table and no more, no less. And also sitting at the table when the first star comes up at the sky. And that was it in my family, and like all the traditional dishes. But in her family, it was like a whole process of like making the dishes together. They had like special things to make the dishes with. And I have never seen that in my life, even though these are Ukrainian traditions and I'm Ukrainian. I lived in Ukraine for my whole life. And like it was first time when I saw all those things in like 17 years at that point. And also how they all dressed up for Christmas. And they all had their own vyshivankas, and she would stay next to her closet and choose between like 5 vyshivankas when I have 2, and I bought both of them myself. So it's just such a different experience, and it's the same with like every holiday, every like piece of tradition. I feel like at some point they were stolen from me, and now I either have to learn about them myself by reading like stories and like going through archives or something, or I have to go to the Western Ukraine, which doesn't make any sense because like this is still the same country. And I'm from Kyiv, and it's even worse in like southern or like eastern parts. Because like I feel like, I don't know, Anya will probably know better, but I feel like in cities like Odessa, the traditions are stored even less than in central Ukraine.
That's okay. I mean, it's fascinating because how much it's like an erasure. You know, when he's talking about genocide, it's like he was mentioning the culture gets erased. It's not, you know, that a lot of people die.
There is a term
but
right
the
now.
culture dies with it.
I feel like there is a term right now that Ukrainians use, at least people who I talk to, a cultural genocide.
Yeah.
Because that's what Russia was trying to do. But the great thing about this war, like the full-scale invasion, is that it turned everything oppositely as from what Russians expected. Because now all Ukrainians have such a strong sense of like belonging to their country, they start to restore all the traditions. For example, there is also a thing called vertap. It happens for Christmas, and it's basically singing carols, like walking around singing carols, and it's also like kind of full performance with different characters. And I never saw it in Kyiv. I saw it multiple times in Lviv, for example,
Okay.
and people would go to like cafes, restaurants. Like my friends would do that all the time. You would go to like people's houses to like earn some money, or go to the cafes, restaurants, and like places where there are a lot of people. So you would show it to them, like tell the story, and also get some money from that.
That's ironic because I've seen it in San Diego at House of Ukraine. They organized it, but you said you can't even see it in Kyiv.
Before
That's
the war, it never happened in Kyiv.
amazing.
Like maybe from the Ukrainian Leadership Academy, they organize it, but that's because one of their values is like keeping the Ukrainian traditions, and also because this academy has like students from all over Ukraine. So there are a lot of people also from Western Ukraine who like contributed a lot to that. But I never had that experience in my life before. Like I was so upset that I got to know about that at like 17, and I never had that before.
Amazing.
Well, me and my friends didn't actually, Odessa. Our parents were very unhappy about it. But we were like, but it was like in Odessa, it's very rare. Like too, like it was very rare too. But my friend and I, we were like, because like we saw other people doing it like in other cities, and we're like, we gotta do this, like, but we didn't have a group, like we were just two people, but like we still tried, and it was fun. But yeah, no, that like it's such a nice thing though, like it's such a nice tradition to have.
But you see how it's a struggle to preserve memory. And whatever remnants of the past is a struggle to uncover it. And also what's the other struggle is the ability to kind of spread, not only preserve the memories of suffering, but then spread those stories. It's all, I mean, this is what at the end of the day, all of this is about. It is the ability that the suffering that has been endured in the past, the suffering that's going on at this very minute is kind of acknowledged and not forgotten. But what are we saying, whether it's the Holodomor or what's even going on right now, that the struggle and the suffering is getting forgotten. And sometimes it might be done intentionally because, of course, this is so traumatic. And for my students now, what Anya was saying about how at international school she had to do these family projects. Now you understand why I assigned this, why this is the major assignment in the class, is to kind of appreciate every single one of you had ancestors that struggled in the past. To be able to bring you, allow you to be here at this very moment. But also for those of you who are not from Ukraine, do you see how vivid it is when you hear about a country in the news, but through characters, through people, through tangible symbols, such as a vyshyvanka, such as an earring, such as, hopefully you'll never look at a piece of bread the same way. And in the film, actually, that is it's a very strong symbol. It's when the protagonist has a piece of bread and it's the most valuable possession, where he's just eating off little bits of it to survive. And that's the point of events like this. It is to take things that are abstractions. Maybe at one time they were front page news, but now have been forgotten. And when you tell stories about them, they're very hard to forget. But also for every single one of you, do you see how these stories define you, no matter how scant they are? Your mom still had to investigate her past at the end of the day. Because how can you define yourself without knowing, what came before you to make you who you are? Yeah. Any other thoughts? Okay, very good, Anya. So in other words, I'm going to post this on YouTube, and you're going to see why you came in at a very opportune moment. So you kind of saved look at the kind of the sentiments you had at the end. But hopefully in 2024, I'll try to show this film, but hopefully by then there'll be a celebration of a victory.
You want to make a film?
Oh, I show this film every year. Now, so I told them a story. I told them a story how every time I show this film, there's some kind of tragedy that comes along with the film. Like nobody's showing up, they'll be losing interest. But hopefully by 2024, the curse will be broken. It'll be something to all of us that we can celebrate. Miguel?
If you're trying to show a film, why do you need a VPN? Don't you already have the film or something?
What's that? I'm showing it through a university computer. So all that VPN stuff is just, I can't even get my Google Pixel to work on this campus. So I mean, I can play around with that, but technically, we're not supposed to mess around with that.
You don't have an account with the film on it, or?
You've seen me this entire semester. When has there not been a day when the technology works?
Is the film like online link or?
Amazon Prime. Oh, let me show it. It's for some reason Amazon Prime works in Prague. And that's the last time I showed it. I had a rude awakening that it didn't work here. And then I know why. I just learned why. Amazon Prime has a Spanish subsidiary. And so technically, I just realized now at this moment when I said it, probably they don't have in Prague is using the US service, but here is a separate service. And I think I had to open a new account.
So you need a second copy of it.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to get a second copy.
I would need to have opened up a second Amazon account. No, and that's it. Amazon owns the rights to the film. So that I just realized now. It's a corporate issue. I just realized Amazon, because I remember some films on Amazon Prime I could never watch before. Then I realized because they wanted me to open up a brand new account. Even though in theory I would assume Amazon should just make everything work seamlessly, but apparently not. Yeah, corporate filters. For you in media, that's something that you've studied, the corporate filters. But it's good because we had this conversation at the end of the day. The film not working did allow for this. Any other thoughts or final questions?
I have more political questions since we're the professor in every club and in every IR departments. So what do you think about China and Russian relations growing in some kind of way? Because Russia now is dependent on China, and China in around, let's say 15 years, they want to finish their military budget or building and start taking over Taiwan and their, similar dreams, kind of saying.
Just if we take a lesson from tonight, because I can't do these grand geopolitical projections, but all I can say of this is if China were to ever take military action against Taiwan, we see what happens. The world will be in an uproar, but then it eventually gets forgotten. That's all I can say if we're going to extrapolate from the past and let it project into the future.
Just because China has already finished their military buildup in terrestrial and like aerospace kind of.
I'm not an expert on Chinese military capabilities. I do know somebody who is. And basically, she said that no matter how much fear there is in the West, still China is nowhere close to developing the amphibious. To launch an amphibious assault of an island is one of the hardest things in terms of military strategy, and China is still nowhere near able to do that. So that's the major difference between Russia and Ukraine, of course. One is there's no geographical boundaries. It's just a flat plain, and partly probably that explains why Russia invaded in the first place. One, because it's just a flat plain with no major geographical boundaries. But amphibious assaults, through most of military history, the hardest things to do were to assault a castle. Usually you besiege the castle, or to do an amphibious assault. Think of D-Day, for example.
Because they have the troops, and it means they just don't have a navy enough.
Yeah. So that's the thing. It's no time. It's not something really. I think it's more Western fear than actual concrete military assets on the Chinese side that could do that.
Is this because there's already reports of China putting all their resources into building massive ships, and they want to basically put it all at work in one time?
Maybe I don't know. That's all. I can just quote a scholar who knows China very well, and that's what she told me. It's just a lot of it's more Western fear than actual. That China, to develop amphibious assaults, aircraft carriers, all this, that takes decades. So that's what I'm just saying. I can't imagine. Maybe it'll be an issue 10 years from now, maybe 5 years from now. Who knows? I can tell you one thing though, of using history to extrapolate in the present. And talk about again trying to preach to the Ukrainians like I've done. Nobody, I mean, a good number of people in Ukraine were taken by surprise. Okay. When the invasion happened. I'll tell you this. In February 2022, I already had set up my apartment in case this Ukrainian and her mom and dad had to come to Spain. Why? Because I knew the invasion was going to happen. I knew it, and I'll tell you why. And this is again the value of history, because in Putin, I saw a lot of similarities with Saddam Hussein. And my doctoral thesis was when Saddam invaded Kuwait. I mean, a lot of similarities, a larger neighbor, a smaller country, a leader who becomes in power for so long and he thinks he could get away with anything and has never suffered defeat. I saw so many similarities. And so while a lot of Ukrainians were caught off guard, that tells you how I had my apartment already ready in early February. I was expecting the attack. I knew it was just not if, but when. Yeah, so I mean, there you go. If you want to talk about analogy and using the past to extrapolate the future, that was like one example where I saw the writing on the wall. Yes, Anthony.
Also the training that were on the borders, they had like what, 350,000 men training.
Saddam did the same thing. Exactly. They were doing trainings on the Kuwaiti border.
I think the way you say about doing apologies, this is kind of like exactly the meaning of my father. I knew that Ukraine at some point was doing that. Ambushed either by Russia or by collusion with someone. And because my father, he used to be during the USSR, he was not the pilot, but the navigator. So he would sit in the glass cabin on the plane and navigate. So he was in the USSR Air Force, and not for a long time, obviously, because then the USSR collapsed. But during the time that he obviously had operations carried out and everything. Like, I guess knowing from the inside what kind of things USSR wanted to carry out and what they carried out before that, because they obviously also had to learn that when he was in the
Sure. Think the invasion of Afghanistan, for
exactly. That's what I was referring to.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they had to study. So after the USSR collapsed, my father, like they were some of his friends continued to be in the Air Force, but they were forced to go to Russia to stay part of the Air Force. So because they took all the Air Force with them in Russia, but he could never do that, and so that's why my father was so convinced that.
Yeah, because he knows what kind of preparation.
So it's the analogy thing. It's very important.
It is the historical analogy, and yeah, it's too bad you never took a history class with me, because your paper was. I mean, you would have given me a great paper for my class. I mean, both from the grandmother and father. It's amazing story. Very good. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? Okay, again, thank you for coming. This is a hard subject to talk about. And like I said, hopefully in November 2024, from ever back here, there'll be something to celebrate by then, let's hope. And yeah, that's it.
Another festive date to our calendars, guys.
Yes.
The date's coming. The date's coming.
Yes, exactly. It's also it's tragic because also Matthew Perry. It's 1 month since his passing. I don't know if any of your friends fans. I was just saying it's another. Okay, I shouldn't have got it. But anyway, guys. Okay, thank you so much. There's no V20 issue, so we know next time when we do Interstellar, we gotta prepare. We gotta like be ready. Because the thing is about so you can yeah, because otherwise it will take him to experience. Even though